time at 12 o'clock, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, and then we start the presentation. And so we have two speakers that have done it before, both experienced proton expert and also experience in use of DIBH for retro for treatment of moving tumor. We have Dr. Arpit Chhabra is attending radiation oncologist at the New York Proton Center, and Dr. Chhabra have been there for many years, and he practiced his specialty in the GI, also in the basic skull spine area. He's a director of education, and he's a lead physician in the international relations program at the center. And he have extensive training in proton at the UC Maryland, also the fellowship there. So he also published extensively many papers, textbook chapter, and use of proton therapy. And the second speaker is Dr. Haibo Lin. He's a chief physicist of proton at the center. And Dr. Lin have trained at UC Pennsylvania, and he also have a lot of experience publication extensively at UPenn, also here at the New York Proton Center. So we are very lucky to have both of them here to give us the discussion about in the operational practical aspect of how to integration of the SDX system into the center, and basically it's a functional aspect of how to use the system in the facility. Question is, how does the SDX system compare to vision RT or other surface-guided radiation therapy? Is this more accurate? What about the patient compliance?
We actually use SDX directly for breast hold purpose. We do have vision RT in our center in entry room 2, and I think the reason we don't consider vision RT for breast hold purpose is because different to the LINAC machine, proton machine actually is more bulky, and also often we use a range shifter, which is an extendable device, and often we want to put the range shifter as closer as possible to the patient. So in that scenario, often the gantry or the range shifter will block the view of the cameras for vision RT. So that means during treatment, we can't do breast hold with vision. That's the limitation. That's why we didn't consider vision RT. On the other side, we have been using SDX for a while, and we see high reproducibility. That's why we stick with it. Regarding to the patient compliance, I think the system is designed very well. It has a goggle. The patient can easily understand what they are doing and how they can collaborate with the therapist regarding to breast hold. And also through the goggle, they can very easily tell when to start, when to stop, and what is the breast hold level where they are. So that's one of the reasons when we select the system that I think it's from user point of view or from patient point of view, it's easy system. Patient is more comfortable with.
Okay, so both devices are the indirect measurement of the target, right? So depending on what system you're comfortable with, and both have plus and minus. I can see that it's a tough. I'm not sure if I've done a study to compare the two systems. But anyway, the next question is, what is the maximum tumor motion have you treated with SDX system?
I think to try to get to that vein, so it's not necessarily the maximum tumor motion pre-SDX. We're intentionally trying to get the motion to be as little as possible with the SDX system. So if the patient is able to tolerate SDX, as we determine at the training session, we're trying to get that motion essentially down to 0 millimeters ideally. Obviously, with the variability within breath hold, intra and intrafraction, it's somewhere within 1 to 3 millimeters.
Yeah, I think that addresses. And then another question to cover similar. Do you do multiple DIBH CT scan for a patient for the better estimation of the basically the target position? And if you so, how you utilize during planning? Do you optimize on the multiple city set or just create one average of the multiple DIBH scan?
That's a very good question. So we Eclipse doesn't have the platform to optimize a dose in multiple cities. So we always just optimize in a single city. Often, if there's a concerns about, the variations from SDX, and a simple way just forward calculate, make sure you have enough margins to cover that. But just based on our evaluation with the mini scan and also the COMBEAM CT alignment, we are comfortable with planning on the single CT. I know some centers also try to create the ITV, but often it's really because the deviation is very minimum, and also your quantification is not that straightforward. I mean, it's hard to tell you quantify, say, oh, I have 2 millimeter of variations around one direction. Is that really accurate or not? So, since we have robust optimization with a relatively larger, set of uncertainties, 5 millimeter, so we think that's sufficient enough. The other thing is with the COMBEAM CT, you always align to soft tissue. So that's give you another confidence that it can always align the target to pretty well.
Yeah. So the next question cover address how you ensure the patient reaches the total lung capacity during each DIBH to assure that inner lung reversibility of the lung tumor in the same position. You do that during a mini scan, right? During the same, so you got that ITV for that. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that mini scan is essentially giving us confidence that it's not a one-time fluke that we're catching in terms of the DIBH CT that we're doing. We're multiply doing a small field of view just to confirm that they're appropriately in a small, 1 or 3 millimeters of their breath hold.
And the next question is how much improvement to the OAR dose do you get with DIBH compared with the free breathing for treatment of breast patient?
Well, that's a good question. I think we have an ongoing project. Another physicist, Dr. Richard Xiong, is working on it. I don't have data right now, but hopefully soon we can present those data to the community.
The one thing I would add to that is, as Dr. Lin was mentioning, I think historically and up to now, we've sort of been really increasingly utilizing SDX for our left breast patients. And now we're pretty busy to the point that we are sort of looking at who are the patients that will get the highest reduction in sort of OAR sparing with SDX. And so we're sort of looking deeper into those left breast patients and seeing which ones we think will get the biggest benefit. And also a point to make, which is for our breast patients, we are doing a DIBH scan and a free breathing scan. So we are doing some element of that assessment cognitively for every patient prior to planning. And one thing to keep in mind is obviously, certainly heart sparing is what everyone's always predominantly thinking about, but then we also do treat a lot of bilateral breast, for instance, for which lung sparing is also helpful, obviously, with the utilization of breath hold.
Yeah, for breast, basically, we experienced the 3 stages regarding SDX. First stage, all the left breast and bilateral, basically involving left breast, we all treat with SDX. And later we realized, it's probably not necessary. Patients struggling because the volume is pretty big and they need to do a lot of breath hold during treatment, and it prolonged the treatment time. So we decided to start evaluate each individual patient, really look at the anatomies and especially separations in how much patient can gain potentially from the DIBH. And now we come to the third stage. Basically, we are very tight on the machine time, machine slot, and we get a pressure, say, okay, we got to evaluate all those SDX patients. If it's not necessary, we should not treat with SDX. So that's why it's ongoing, and we try to collect the data and try to come up with some criteria for patient selection, and on the other side, just guide the clinics.
Yeah. So the next question is for the auto-gating interface that SDX have with the ProBeam system. What is the latency beam on and off, or is it beam pause or beam off and on completely for your case? Because there's a question.
If I understand the question correctly, it's kind of what Dr. Lin had alluded to in one of the slides, which is it's only a 1 millisecond latency with respect to gating with the SDX system. That's relatively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's very good.
1 millisecond communication time.
So the question is, do you plan to have a phase gating in the future beside DIBH?
Yeah, and again, it kind of goes to, I think, the third to last slide of Dr. Lin's, which is future directions and sort of working with obviously DYN'R and our industry partners and obviously our team here internally to look at alternatives to deep inspiratory breath hold, but rather maybe deep expiratory breath hold or even free breathing gating capabilities, since you've got that sort of interface and the goggles and you know kind of what the breathing cycle is looking like. So yes, there are many patients who have underlying lung disease, underlying comorbidities, obviously liver patients, many of whom are not the highest performance status or are not able to all hold inspiratory breath hold, but for whom we feel we would ideally want to have some element of motion management, more so than just compression belt. For those patients, yes, there is hope for future directions and doing things a little bit differently by using this interface.
Yeah, you mentioned that you need about 20-25 breath hold for each treatment. That seems quite a lot, isn't it? I mean, each treatment you have 25 seconds per breath hold, right? So if you think about 1 minute for 2 ray per 1 liter, do you really need 20-25 breath hold for each fraction?
It basically depends on the target volume size and also the dose rate itself. In the beginning, when we started, we basically didn't realize we can have a way to adjust the dose rate. And later on, we find out and we created different models that really help to speed up the beam delivery. I think for DIBH, that's a very important key factor. And in the recent meeting with Varian, they brought up another concept, rapid scan. Basically, with this upgrade and rapid scan capability, each beam delivery is limited to 10 seconds. In that sense, you just need to 1 breath hold. So if that happened, I don't think we need to limit the SDX use, because you basically hold 1 time, you deliver the beam. It won't prolong the treatment time, and we're waiting for that coming. But we don't know how long it takes to get that.
And I would just kind of add to what Dr. Lin said, which is, we have sort of, I think, evolved from 2019 to now in terms of our use of SDX and how to efficiently utilize it. And like Dr. Lin is saying, the number of breath holds we've tried to limit to be as low as possible, though it's still a function of sort of how large the target is, the MU utilization, number of beam utilization. And one of the questions that I think I saw on the list is, what do you do in terms of intra-fraction patient motion as a risk when you have a long treatment time? A little bit different on the proton side for those who are utilizing proton therapy, because treatment times can be a little bit longer, both from a standpoint of not just breath hold, but because of beam wait time or setup time. We do a little bit more imaging and utilization of our cone beam and KV than maybe what someone would do using VMAT. In part, that's to mitigate that intra-fraction patient motion that happens a little bit more so on the proton side.
Yeah, so I think we addressed most of the question, besides question like, have you treated a blind patient with DIBH? Would that happen? And how about a patient, elderly patient, can they handle the SDX system? So,
sorry, could you ask that question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, have you used the SDX system in a blind person or used in an elderly patient?
Oh, blind.
We have not used it in a blind person, as far as I know. That would certainly be difficult because the goggles are an integral part of the system itself. From a standpoint of elderly patients, we absolutely have used it for elderly patients. obviously we know cancer is, high incidence in the elderly. Again, it's not so much the age, it's really the understandability, the comfort level, the performance status, comorbidities, and there's a lot of functions that go into understanding who's going to be the best patient, and patient selection, as Dr. Lin mentioned, is a very critical part at the time of simulation. So as your team gets more and more experience with the system, I think they'll start to have that sort of gut instinct of who they think is good and who they think is going to have trouble. So as you can see, it's using this system is not just a one group who sort of runs it. You could see it requires not only the clinician, but the physicist, the therapist, obviously the dosimetrist. It's a multi-team and disciplinary effort to actually be able to utilize something like this, but it's obviously been very helpful for a lot of our patients.
Yeah, I agree.
I did have experiences of, treat SDX without goggle. It actually went better than I expected. Basically, the therapist need to talk to patient and explain that the therapist will give the patient audio instruction. You take breath on and hold it at certain level when they reach to the gating window. It's just not as straightforward or not as efficient as you have a goggle, you can see it. But I think it worked out very well after education to the patient. And besides, I think other spirometer-based systems doesn't have a goggle, although they have some kind of glass. And a lot of centers don't use that. Basically, it's based on the audio instruction. I think it's feasible and for a specific patient, it's fine.
Yeah, I know that SDX working on the audio system that can help patients in the queue when to hold the breath and exhale breath. I think it's coming up. Also, they also work on the deep expiry, also available. And another question that I asked, I thought would be interesting is, have you used the SDX in conjunction with the layer or volumetric repainting?
Typically, no. The one of the technical reason is, as I mentioned, when the minimum MU of each layer drop, the dose rate will also drop. So if we do repainting, it will split the field into two. That means the dose rate will drop certain percentage. So really, we for the breath hold, we actually want the beam to deliver faster than slower.
Okay, so I think we have reached the time limit, 50 minutes over the time limit. And I would like to thank you both Dr. Arpit Chhabra and Dr. Haibo Lin for sharing their experience. And this is an excellent talk. And I learned a lot, even have used it for many years. But thank you very much.